In a time when the traditional pursuit of employment dominates the minds and ambitions of so many, this speech delivers a powerful jolt to the conventional narrative. With a voice that balances spiritual depth and practical urgency, the speaker calls upon listeners to reassess their dependence on job seeking as the sole path to provision and success. The tone is calm yet forceful, layered with the confidence of faith and the sharp edge of truth. This isn't just a motivational push, it's a paradigm shift, one that tells you it's time to stop chasing after jobs and start building something now. The speech begins by addressing the psychological dependency people have developed around employment. The speaker points out how society conditions individuals, especially youth, to believe that their worth, stability, and dignity are tethered to being hired by someone else. But then comes the challenge: what if that job never comes? Or worse, what if it comes and still fails to fulfill your purpose? The audience is not left hanging. Immediately there's a redirection, not toward fantasy or wishful thinking, but toward action rooted in resourcefulness, faith, and self-reliance. The speaker presents the concept of risk not as something to fear, but something to embrace when guided by purpose and trust in divine provision. Faith is not about waiting passively for doors to open, it's about knocking down walls with what you already have. This message is laced with spiritual wisdom, urging the listener to recognize the talents, ideas, and means they already possess, however small they may seem. There's a heavy critique of the employee mindset, a mindset that seeks comfort over courage, instruction over inspiration, and certainty over creativity. It's not a condemnation of jobs themselves, but of the mental box people trap themselves in when they believe a job is the only means to survive or succeed. What follows is a call to immediate and intentional action. Whether it's selling a product, offering a service, or using technology to build a platform, the speaker insists: start now. Don't wait for approval. Don't wait for a boss. Don't wait until conditions are perfect, because they never will be. The speech pulses with urgency but never slips into recklessness. Instead, it's grounded in the principle of tawakkul, true reliance on God while taking firm and consistent steps forward. There's an unmistakable energy in the message, a kind of wake-up call that stirs both the heart and the hustle. Listeners are not just informed, they are provoked to rethink, to rise, and to run toward the opportunities that lie hidden in plain sight. It's not a speech about escaping reality, it's about confronting it with faith, vision, and grit. And the ultimate takeaway is clear: your provision does not lie in the hands of employers, it lies in the hands of your Creator, and He has already given you more than enough to begin. In today's world, much of society is shaped by a deeply ingrained belief system that equates success with employment. From early childhood, people are taught that their ultimate goal should be to graduate, get a degree, and then secure a good job, ideally one that pays well, offers benefits, and provides long-term security. This belief, though seemingly logical and widely accepted, has created a subtle but powerful prison in the minds of millions. It forms what can be called an employee mindset, a psychological framework where one's self-worth, potential, and purpose are all tied to being accepted by an employer or institution. This mindset has been so normalized that many do not even recognize its limiting nature. The speech directly challenges this mental cage, confronting the audience with an uncomfortable, liberating truth. The overdependence on jobs as the only route to survival, dignity, and success is both dangerous and spiritually shallow. The speaker presents this concept with a calm but unflinching tone. He does not belittle the value of work or insult those who are employed. Rather, he targets the inner framework that causes people to feel helpless, anxious, and often paralyzed when they are not hired or when they lose a job. He brings attention to the fear-based structure modern economies have built, where people live in constant worry about employment, constantly refreshing their emails for job alerts, sending out applications, and waiting desperately for someone to validate their capabilities. The deeper issue he touches on is not just economic but spiritual and psychological. Why does one feel incomplete, insecure, or directionless when they are unemployed? Why is the concept of no job immediately associated with failure or shame? These are the questions he forces listeners to wrestle with. To break this cycle, the speech offers a profound internal shift. One must break free from the employee mindset and awaken to their individual potential and God-given resources. The problem with the employee mindset is not the job itself, but the dependency it creates. When a person believes that their only means of sustenance comes through a paycheck from an employer, they unconsciously hand over control of their life to another human being. They wait for someone else to determine their schedule, their income, their opportunities, and even their lifestyle. This surrender, while normalized, is not natural, and more importantly, it is not Islamic in its foundations. Islam teaches that provision risk comes solely from Allah, and that while seeking work is noble, relying fully on people or institutions for one's sustenance is a form of misplaced trust. The speaker highlights this by reminding the audience that every individual has something within them, an ability, a skill, an idea, a resource that can be transformed into a means of income. Yet people are often blinded to these opportunities because their minds are conditioned to only seek jobs. Even when someone has skills in art, writing, repair, cooking, selling, or digital knowledge, they often don't consider turning that into a self-sustaining activity unless they're employed to do it. This is the exact bondage the speech wants to destroy. The world is filled with people who have incredible talents and hidden brilliance, yet they remain stuck, depressed, and underutilized because they are constantly seeking permission to act, a permission that typically comes in the form of being hired. By breaking free from this thinking, a person begins to reclaim their God-given power. They start to see possibilities instead of barriers. The speech emphasizes that building something of your own, no matter how small, is not only a practical step but a spiritual one. When someone starts their own small business, offers a service, creates a product, or monetizes their skill, they are essentially saying, I trust that my Creator has given me enough. I trust that my sustenance is in His control, not in the hands of employers. This shift leads to emotional liberation. No longer does a person feel defeated if a job doesn't come through. No longer do they measure their self-worth based on rejection letters. Instead, they become proactive, resourceful, and spiritually rooted. The speech also touches on a powerful truth. The current world economy is unpredictable. Layoffs, automation, political instability, and changing industries mean that job security is an illusion for most people. In such a volatile landscape, relying on one stream of income, especially one that is controlled by someone else, is incredibly risky. The speaker challenges people to ask themselves what they will do if that single job disappears. How will they feed their families? How will they maintain their dignity? These questions are not meant to create panic, but to encourage people to think deeply and prepare wisely. Building something of your own, even if it starts slow, offers a form of resilience and dignity that jobs can never fully guarantee. It gives a person the ability to adapt, to expand, to learn, and most importantly, to control their own time and values. Another element the speaker weaves into this message is the importance of intention. Starting your own project or business is not just about income, it's about serving others with what you have been given. Islam emphasizes contribution and productivity. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and many of his companions were traders, entrepreneurs, and people who created value through their own hands and efforts. They did not sit idly, waiting for others to provide. They took initiative with full reliance on Allah. This prophetic model is what the speech is calling the audience back to, not a life of dependence, but a life of responsibility and action. In practical terms, the speaker also mentions that technology has opened doors that never existed before. In previous generations, starting a business required capital, space, inventory, and infrastructure. Today, someone can begin earning from home using nothing but a phone or a laptop. Whether it's content creation, e-commerce, digital services, consulting, or freelance work, the opportunities are vast. But the employee mindset blinds people from seeing these avenues. They may scroll past dozens of online opportunities every day and ignore them, not because they are lazy, but because they have been taught to seek real jobs instead of real solutions. This mental conditioning is subtle but powerful, and it must be broken with intention and faith. A powerful moment in the speech comes when the speaker reminds listeners that waiting endlessly for the perfect opportunity is not only a waste of time, but a form of passive desperation. Life is not meant to be lived in the waiting room. There is no such thing as a perfect time to begin. The world rewards those who act. Even if you fail at first, even if the progress is slow, starting something of your own plants the seeds for future independence and success. More importantly, it deepens your connection with Allah because you begin to experience firsthand what it means to rely on Him for provision, guidance, and success. The emotional and spiritual strength that comes from breaking free from the employee mindset is deeply transformative. People who take this leap often find that they not only improve their finances but also gain clarity, confidence, and a deeper understanding of their own worth. They stop begging for opportunities and start creating them. They stop doubting themselves and start growing into their potential. The fears that once held them back lose their grip because their trust is no longer in resumes, interviews, or corporate structures. It is in the one who controls all outcomes. The speech does not promote arrogance or the illusion that everyone must be a millionaire entrepreneur. That is not the point. The core message is about self-respect, proactivity, and breaking free from the mental cage that says you are only valuable if someone hires you. It's about recognizing that Allah has placed inside every human being the tools for sustenance, dignity, and success. The responsibility lies in discovering those tools, refining them, and putting them to use, not waiting endlessly for others to discover your value. In conclusion, this message is not just a piece of advice, it is a wake-up call. The world has changed. The old model of education followed by employment is not enough for many anymore. To thrive in today's reality, spiritually, emotionally, and financially, people must embrace a new way of thinking. They must see themselves as providers, creators, and contributors, not just as employees waiting to be used. They must believe that Allah has already given them enough to begin, and they must understand that true freedom begins when they stop waiting and start walking toward opportunity, toward purpose, and ultimately toward divine reliance. This is the heart of breaking free from the employee mindset, and it is a message that could change not only individual lives but entire communities if it were truly understood and implemented. Most people, when they think about starting something of their own, imagine needing a grand idea, a large amount of money, or a breakthrough opportunity. They picture offices, logos, investments, and viral success. Because of this, many end up doing nothing, paralyzed by the belief that they don't have enough to begin. This way of thinking becomes a major excuse, even if it doesn't sound like one. The truth is, what most people need is not something outside of them, it's something within them. And that's exactly what this point in the speech drives home. The speaker calls out a deeply rooted problem in how people perceive their capabilities. Instead of looking inward and recognizing what they already possess, in skills, in ideas, in resources, even in time, they wait for a perfect storm of conditions that may never come. This is not just a practical issue. It's a spiritual one. It reveals a lack of appreciation for what Allah has already given. The speaker confronts this flawed outlook directly. He says that people are constantly praying for opportunities, for financial freedom, for stability, for success, and yet they ignore the very tools that are already in their hands. They look over them because they're too small or not enough. But in the eyes of God, even something small can be a door to something great. The message here is simple but powerful. Start with what you have. The gift, the skill, the experience, the story, whatever it is, use it. Stop saying if only and start saying even if it's little, even if it's not perfect, even if it's unfamiliar, begin with it. That mindset shift alone can unlock blessings that were otherwise blocked by doubt and inaction. The problem is many people underestimate what they already know and what they can already do. Someone who can cook well assumes everyone can. A person who can design, repair, fix, clean, organize, or teach something, they dismiss it as nothing special, but there is always someone out there who needs exactly what you can do. The problem is not ability, the problem is awareness and appreciation. The speaker pushes the listener to take inventory, not of what they lack, but of what they already carry. That might be a skill passed down from a parent, or a lesson learned in hardship, or a talent that was never formally trained, but is naturally present. These things are not random, they are not insignificant, they are provisions, risk, placed in you by the one who provides for all, and to ignore them is to ignore his gift. He gives practical examples that hit home. If you can bake, bake. If you can teach, tutor someone. If you can drive, offer rides or deliveries. If you're good at social media, help a small business grow. If you have a phone with a camera, start creating content or selling online. If you've been through a tough experience, turn it into guidance for someone else. None of these require a large investment. They require recognition, the ability to see value in what you already have. Because the path forward is not always found in some brand new thing. Sometimes it's hidden in the overlooked ordinary. The speech also touches on how people waste their resources without even realizing it. Time, for example, is one of the most underutilized resources today. People say they don't have time to build something, yet they spend hours scrolling, watching, or talking about things that offer nothing in return. Energy is another. People say they're tired, but they spend their energy worrying, doubting, overthinking instead of creating, experimenting, or learning. Even the people around us, family, friends, neighbors, are part of our God-given resources. Sometimes the first few clients or supporters of an idea are already within reach, but we overlook them because we're waiting for strangers to validate us. The speaker challenges this attitude. He says if you can't start with what's already near you, what makes you think you'll do something with what's far away? It's also a matter of perspective. Two people can have the same skill. One sees it as a burden, the other sees it as a blessing. One hides it out of fear, the other shares it out of faith. The one who believes in their God-given resources begins to attract more. Allah promises in the Quran, "If you are grateful, I will surely increase you." That promise isn't limited to feelings. It applies to actions. When you use what you've been given, no matter how little, with sincerity and gratitude, you unlock increase. That's a spiritual principle, not just a motivational phrase. And the speech emphasizes this deeply. The listener is reminded that what they call not enough could be the very thing that takes them to a new level, if only they treated it with honor and consistency. What's striking about this point is that it doesn't require the listener to wait for anything external. There's no gatekeeper, there's no interview, no approval, no official green light. It's a message that shifts the listener's focus from the outside world to the inside world. It tells them that Allah has not made them dependent on perfect circumstances to move forward. In fact, many great journeys in life began in broken places. Many successful people started with nothing, no money, no audience, no structure, but they used what they had. That's the difference. The person who moves with little receives more. The person who waits for more before they move stays stuck. There's also a deeper wisdom here. Using what you already have builds self-trust and resilience. When you begin with what's near, what's familiar, and what's available, you learn to adapt, to grow, and to be resourceful. You don't become entitled, you become grateful. And that kind of person, the one who makes something out of very little, is often the one who ends up being entrusted with much more, not just by people but by God. That's because they've proven they can be trusted with little. They've shown up, they've acted, they've honored the blessings already in their life. This approach also removes excuses. So many people delay starting something because they feel like they need to go back to school, get certified, raise money, build a website, or buy equipment. While those things can help, they are often used as crutches, ways to avoid the discomfort of beginning. The speaker calls this out. He tells the audience that the perfect setup is a myth. Start where you are, with your phone, your voice, your hands, your story, your skill. Start with your kitchen, your bedroom, your neighborhood. Whatever is in your reach, use it. Don't despise small beginnings. Don't be ashamed of humble starts. Many of the world's greatest businesses, movements, and ideas were born in garages, basements, and broken places. It's not the size of the start that matters, it's the strength of the niyyah, intention. There's a moment in the speech where the speaker reminds us of the widow who came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, desperate and in need. Instead of handing her something material, the Prophet asked her what she had in her home. She replied, just a small container, and from that small container, through his guidance and Allah's blessing, she was able to build something sustainable. This prophetic example is not just a nice story, it's a template. Look around you. What's in your home? What's in your heart? What's in your hands? Start from there. The speech's message becomes even more relevant in the modern age where people often fall into the trap of comparison. Social media has created a culture where people only see polished versions of others' lives, the highlights, the milestones, the success stories. This creates a false belief that unless you can start big, you shouldn't start at all. The speaker dismantles this myth. He says that greatness isn't found in what you show, it's found in what you build with what you have. If you've got 10 minutes a day, use them. If you have one skill, refine it. If you can help one person, do it. Because starting small isn't the enemy of success, starting never is. The heart of this point is empowerment through gratitude and action. It's about rewiring your mind to see the tools Allah has already placed in your life. It's about shifting from scarcity to abundance, from helplessness to ownership, from waiting to moving. It's about knowing that the barakah blessing is not always in getting more, but in using well what you already have. And when you do, things begin to open up in ways you never imagined. People begin to notice, opportunities begin to come, growth begins to happen. But only after you've shown that you're ready, not when everything is perfect, but when your attitude is. To conclude, this point is not just motivational, it's deeply practical and spiritual. It breaks the illusion that you need something else, somewhere else, or someone else to start living your purpose. It tells you you are already equipped, not perfectly, but sufficiently. And if you use what you already have with sincerity and consistency, Allah will add to it. That's not just hope, that's His promise. One of the most damaging beliefs that keeps people stuck in life is the idea that they must wait for the right time, the right support, the right tools, or the right circumstances before they can begin doing something meaningful. This belief may sound rational on the surface, but in truth, it often becomes a permanent excuse. People sit on ideas for years. They talk about what they'll do one day once everything is in place. That one day, however, never seems to arrive. Life moves, time passes, opportunities fade, and people remain where they are, waiting, hesitating, delaying, postponing. This speech directly confronts that mindset and calls it out for what it is: a trap. The speaker insists that the time to start is not tomorrow, not later, not someday, but now, immediately, with whatever is available, with or without applause, with or without full clarity. Because waiting doesn't create momentum, starting does. What makes this message so compelling is that it's not just motivational fluff. It's rooted in both spiritual truth and worldly observation. When you study the lives of successful people, especially those who made something out of nothing, you find a common trait: they didn't wait for the perfect conditions to begin. They began while things were imperfect, they moved forward while still afraid, they acted without knowing what the full picture would look like. The difference between people who build and people who wish often comes down to one decision: the decision to begin. That's what this part of the speech hammers into the listener's heart. If you want change, you must act. Thinking is not enough. Planning is not enough. Praying alone is not enough. All of these must be followed by action. The speech delivers a subtle yet profound truth that the act of starting itself generates clarity, confidence, and growth. Many people assume they need full clarity before they begin. But the speaker argues that you gain clarity through starting, not before it. When you take the first step, the second step becomes more visible. And after the second, the third. Action reveals what thought alone cannot. Experience teaches what theory cannot provide. So while others are stuck overthinking, the person who starts, even in a small way, begins to move. They learn faster, they adapt quicker, they stand out, they separate themselves from the crowd of dreamers who are always planning but never producing. This message becomes even more urgent when you consider how quickly time is passing. The speaker reminds us that life is short, unpredictable, and full of distractions. Every day that goes by without taking action is a day that will never return. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. Not because the task grows more difficult, but because your energy and belief begin to fade. When you delay something meaningful for too long, you slowly convince yourself that it's no longer possible. The fire inside you weakens. That's why the speaker insists on starting now. Not because everything will be perfect, but because action keeps the fire alive. Once you take the first step, the inner flame grows stronger. You begin to see possibilities that you didn't see before. The speech also points out that waiting is often based on fear: fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough. These fears wear clever disguises. They present themselves as wisdom, caution, or realism, but in reality they are forms of avoidance. The speaker challenges the listener to look those fears in the eye and act anyway. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's movement in spite of fear. When you act while afraid, you send a message to yourself and to the world that fear will not be your master. And as you keep acting, the fear begins to fade. This process doesn't just build projects, it builds character. There's also a strong spiritual foundation in this message. In Islam, we are taught that barakah, divine blessing, often appears after effort is made. When Moses was facing the Red Sea, Allah didn't split it immediately. He first told him to strike it with his staff. Only after he acted, the miracle came. Similarly, when Mary was giving birth under the palm tree, Allah instructed her to shake the trunk even though she was in labor and exhausted. Only after she did, dates fell down. These examples are not just historical events, they are timeless lessons. Start first, move, act. Then the help of Allah comes, not before, not while waiting, but while doing. The speaker uses this principle to empower the listener. He makes it clear that action is a form of tawakkul, true reliance on Allah. Many people think that waiting for the perfect moment is patience, but often it's procrastination wearing the clothes of patience. Real patience is found in working consistently even when results are slow. Real trust in Allah is found in planting seeds even when you don't know how the harvest will come. The person who takes a step with sincerity, even a small one, is far ahead of the person who keeps saying Insha'Allah while doing nothing. The speaker doesn't mock this phrase, rather he restores its meaning. Insha'Allah should accompany action, not replace it. One of the most relatable insights in this section of the speech is the way it addresses the perfection trap. So many people delay starting something because they want it to be flawless. They want the perfect name, the perfect idea, the perfect launch. But the truth is, perfection is the enemy of progress. Waiting to get everything right often means you'll never start at all. And even if you wait for perfection, the first version of anything will still be rough. Whether it's a business, a YouTube channel, a product, or a personal project, the beginning will always be imperfect. And that's okay. The goal is not to be perfect, the goal is to begin. Perfection comes through repetition. Excellence comes through iteration. The speaker encourages listeners to let go of the need for perfection and instead embrace the process of building, improving, and evolving. In a world flooded with content, ideas, and distractions, the people who rise are not the ones with the best ideas. They're the ones who act on their ideas. They execute, they publish, they show up, and they keep showing up. The speech emphasizes consistency just as much as it emphasizes action. It's not enough to start once and then stop. The power is in starting and then continuing. Even if the pace is slow, even if the results are small, consistency compounds. It builds credibility, skill, and momentum. And over time, it builds trust with your audience, with your clients, with your community, and most importantly, with yourself. The speech also removes the false belief that one must begin in isolation. Starting doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means doing something even if it's small. Share an idea with a friend. Make a short video. Offer a service. Post your product. Register your name. Learn one new thing. These small beginnings matter. They show that you're serious. They show that you're ready. And once you move, support begins to appear. People who never noticed you before suddenly start paying attention. Helpers appear. Resources arrive. Doors open. But the doors don't open until you knock. That's the divine law. Effort precedes expansion. Throughout the message, the speaker destroys the myth that some people are just lucky or born into better chances. While it's true that not everyone starts from the same place, it's also true that many people waste their chances because they never act on them. It's not about where you start, it's about whether you start and whether you keep going. The listener is reminded that most people never reach their potential, not because they're unqualified, but because they never begin. They die with ideas still inside them, projects unlaunched, stories untold, gifts unused. The tragedy is not failure. The tragedy is never trying. There's something powerful and sobering in that. It puts responsibility back in your hands. It tells you that the delay is not the world's fault. It's not your parents' fault, or your bosses, or society's. Yes, life may be unfair. Yes, systems may be flawed. But in the middle of all of that, you still have the power to begin. You still have the ability to take one step forward. And that one step, no matter how small, might change your entire direction. That one decision to begin might be the reason generations after you live differently. To wrap this up, the speech's message, to start immediately, is not harsh, it's merciful. It doesn't shame you for being late. It invites you to start fresh. It reminds you that it's not too late, that something small today is better than something big someday, that the present moment is all you truly have, and that if you don't respect this moment, you'll keep disrespecting the next one too. The listener is told, gently but firmly, the time to start is now, not when you're fully ready, not when you're fully confident, but now, while you still have breath, while you still have time, while your heart still beats with hope. Start with a whisper, start with a step, but start, because your future is waiting, but only if you move. There comes a point in every believer's life where they are forced to examine the gap between what they claim to believe and how they actually behave. Faith, when spoken, is easy, but faith, when lived, demands courage, especially in matters of sustenance. Most people say they trust in God, that they know He is the provider, that He controls all wealth and distribution. But when tested, when the income dries up, when the job disappears, when the bank account shrinks, panic sets in. Fear replaces faith. Anxiety silences gratitude. In that moment, one begins to see whether their belief in divine provision, in tawakkul, is just a phrase on the tongue or a state in the heart. The speaker in this part of the speech holds nothing back. He urges the listener to reconnect with the truth that Allah is our Razak, the ultimate provider, and that this reality must be the foundation of any pursuit, especially when stepping into independent, self-reliant efforts. This trust in divine provision is not passive. It's not the kind of false dependence that some fall into, sitting at home, doing nothing, and expecting money to fall from the sky. That is not tawakkul, that is laziness disguised as piety. The speech makes a sharp distinction here. True tawakkul is a dynamic balance. You tie your camel, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, and then you trust in Allah. You plant the seed, water the soil, and then leave the results to Him. The mistake many make is leaning too heavily on one side. Some people put in effort but forget about God's role. They stress, they panic, they rely on people, they hustle with no trust. Others claim they are relying on God but take no meaningful action. They avoid responsibility and call it patience. This speech calls both of these extremes into question. It calls for a real, lived, heart-deep trust that expresses itself through effort, not in the absence of it. The speaker offers a perspective that cuts through the noise of modern economic fear. In a world where jobs are idolized, companies are glorified, and salaries are treated like lifelines, people have unconsciously begun to see human systems as the source of their provision. But the truth is, your boss is not your provider. The company is not your source. The government is not the giver. These are just means, tools that Allah uses. The actual source, the actual provider is always Allah. The risk, then, is not in losing the job. The risk is in forgetting the one who provides with or without the job. This shift in thinking changes everything. Because when you understand that provision flows from the Creator, not the creation, you stop begging people and start asking Him. You stop fearing rejection and start focusing on excellence. You stop panicking when one door closes because your hope wasn't in the door but in the one who holds all keys. There is a great peace in this understanding. A peace that is not tied to results, a calmness that does not depend on how much money comes in today or how many customers show up. When you work with tawakkul, you stop being desperate for outcomes. You do your part with sincerity, with quality, with discipline, but you don't carry the burden of results on your back. That is God's domain. Your job is to move. His job is to provide. The speech emphasizes this, not to discourage ambition but to purify it. Because when your heart is focused only on results, money, followers, numbers, you become a slave to outcomes. But when your heart is focused on Allah, outcomes become a bonus, not the goal. And ironically, when you stop obsessing over results and instead commit to consistency with sincerity, you often see better results. Because barakah, divine blessing, enters your effort. The speaker gives examples from the lives of the prophets and early believers. These were people who faced extreme poverty, rejection, migration, even threats to their lives, and yet they never stopped working. Nor did they ever stop trusting. They made hijrah, migration, they built from scratch, they dealt with hardship, and all the while their reliance on Allah never broke. In fact, the harder things got, the more their trust deepened. This is a reminder to modern listeners that the path of risk-taking, entrepreneurship, or self-reliance is not new. It is deeply woven into Islamic history. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself was a trader, a man who worked with his hands and dealt with real-life market challenges. But he never believed his wealth came from the market. It came from Allah. He used the means, but his heart was never trapped by them. This spiritual freedom is what the speech wants every listener to taste. One of the most striking insights in this part of the speech is how tawakkul actually boosts action rather than slowing it. In the modern mindset, people often assume that if you're too spiritual or if you leave things to God, you won't be productive. But the speaker flips this narrative completely. He says that true trust in Allah fuels effort. It gives you the strength to keep going when nothing is working. It gives you the patience to handle slow growth. It gives you the optimism to try again after failure. Because your hope is not in the project. Your hope is in the sustainer of all projects. This makes you fearless. You're no longer bound by fear of failure, because you know that success and failure are both in the hands of the most merciful. And even if you fail in the worldly sense, if you worked with sincerity, your reward is still preserved with God. The psychological power of tawakkul cannot be overstated. When someone truly believes that Allah is the provider, they become less anxious about competition. They stop comparing themselves to others who are doing similar things. They stop rushing or cutting corners. They understand that no one can take what has been written for them. This belief removes jealousy, envy, and desperation. It builds a quiet confidence, not arrogance, but a calm assurance. You walk into every day knowing that if you do your part, what's meant for you will reach you, and what's not meant for you will pass by no matter how much you chase it. This gives you dignity. You can be ambitious without being greedy. You can seek without begging. You can work without being worked up. Another powerful point the speaker makes is that provision is not always what we expect. Sometimes Allah provides through unexpected doors, people you didn't know, opportunities you never planned, blessings that seemed random but were precisely calculated. When you live with tawakkul, you stay open to these surprises. You don't limit God's ability to provide through your own imagination. If you think your income can only come from one place, you're putting limits on the one who is limitless. The believer understands that provision can come in ways that logic cannot predict, and often it is our job to keep moving, not to figure out the how, but to stay faithful to the why. The how is God's business. The why, our purpose, our value, our sincerity, is ours to manage. There's also an emotional healing in distrust. Many people have been hurt by jobs, by employers, by layoffs, by financial failure. They carry that trauma into their future attempts. They fear stepping out on their own because they remember how painful it was to lack income or to feel unappreciated. The speech acknowledges this silently but responds to it powerfully. It says, if people failed you, remember they were never your provider to begin with. God was, He still is. And if you turn to Him with a clean heart and take action with trust, He can restore what you lost and replace it with something better. This is not just a comforting idea, it is a tested truth seen in countless lives. The message of tawakkul is not meant to remove responsibility. It's meant to remove despair. It's meant to energize the soul, not paralyze it. It's meant to help you walk lightly, work sincerely, and rest deeply, knowing that your Lord sees every step, every effort, and every tear. Nothing is wasted. No sincere effort is ignored. Even if the money is slow, even if the results are small, even if no one notices, Allah does. And His provision is not always in currency. Sometimes it's in peace, in clarity, in new ideas, in strong relationships, in lessons that prepare you for what's next. But you must act with that belief. You must walk like someone who trusts that heaven is watching. The speech reminds us that the opposite of tawakkul is not just fear, it's control. The desire to control every outcome, to predict every turn, to manipulate every variable. That's exhausting, and it's also false. None of us are in control. Even the most powerful person is dependent on breath, and breath is not in their hands. So to live chasing control is to live chasing a lie. Tawakkul invites you to surrender control, not in weakness, but in trust. To say, I will work hard, I will be wise, I will be patient, and I will leave the results to the one who knows better than me. This surrender is the source of a type of strength that no money can buy. It creates the kind of individual who moves through life with grace, courage, and inner stillness. In the end, the speech's call to trust in divine provision is not a detour from financial strategy, it is the foundation of it. You can learn skills, build businesses, create content, serve communities, but if your heart is panicked and full of fear, you will always be a slave to outcomes. If your heart is settled and trusting, you will always find a way forward, even when things go wrong. This trust is not built overnight. It is built step by step through action, prayer, reflection, and resilience. But once it's there, it becomes unshakable. The listener is left with a deep realization. Maybe the job didn't work out because Allah wanted to free you. Maybe the rejection was a redirection. Maybe the delay was preparation. And maybe, just maybe, this entire journey was not about income. It was about trust. Because in the end, when you truly rely on Allah, you will never be left empty-handed. Not in this world, and certainly not in the next. Would you like the final point explained next in this same detailed format? You said, very logere expaloin 5 point without headings around 2000 words. ChatGPT said, of course. Here's a long flowing narrative style explanation approx. 2000 words of the fifth key point. From the speech, don't go after jobs anymore. Start this instantly. Jobs are not the only source of sustenance. Written without headings or labels, continuing in the same tone and depth. From a young age, most people are conditioned to believe that a job is the only legitimate or dignified source of income. Children are told to study hard so they can eventually get a good job. Success, in the eyes of many parents, communities, and even educational systems, is measured by how quickly one gets employed and how much that job pays. But the problem with this mindset is not just its narrow definition of success, it's the dependence it creates. When a person grows up believing that a job is their only route to survival, their entire identity, self-worth, and emotional stability become tied to whether someone else gives them a chance. This part of the speech aims to dismantle that narrative completely and open the listener's mind to the broader and richer concept of rizq, provision from Allah, which is not confined to jobs, salaries, companies, or formal employment. The speaker does not reject the idea of working for someone else. He does not mock or belittle jobs. What he critiques is the dangerous belief that a job is the only valid or secure path to provision. Because when that belief takes root, people begin to panic when they are unemployed. They feel worthless if they are not hired. They become desperate to impress potential employers. They start doubting themselves when no offer arrives. And most tragically, they lose sight of the fact that Allah, not the employer, is the one who feeds, clothes, and sustains them. The speech invites the listener to rethink everything they've been taught about where income really comes from, and it offers a powerful reminder: jobs are a means, not the source. They are just one of countless doors through which Allah can send provision. This mental shift is not just liberating, it's necessary. Because in the modern world, job markets are unstable. Companies collapse, industries shift, automation replaces workers. Governments struggle to create enough opportunities for rapidly growing populations. In such a reality, tying one's hope, income, and future entirely to jobs is like building a house on sand. It might stand for a while, but it will eventually crumble. The speech challenges listeners to start building their lives on a firmer foundation, one that recognizes the limitless ways Allah can provide. This doesn't mean people should quit their jobs or reject employment altogether. It means they should stop depending entirely on it, both emotionally and spiritually. What follows is an invitation to explore alternative forms of earning, some of which are already within reach but overlooked. People often assume that business is only for the elite, that entrepreneurship requires massive capital, or that freelancing is too unstable. But the speaker highlights a deeper truth. Throughout history, many people, including the prophets, earned from their own skills and trades. There is dignity in creating, selling, trading, and serving. There is nobility in working with your hands, managing your time, and taking responsibility for your income. In fact, this model was deeply embedded in the early Muslim society. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a merchant before prophethood. Many companions supported themselves through trade, farming, craftsmanship, and independent labor. These were not desperate side hustles, they were respectable, even celebrated paths of earning. The speech revives this spirit and calls on modern Muslims to reclaim it. The beauty of this message is that it doesn't romanticize business as a fast track to riches. It presents self-reliance as a mindset, one rooted in initiative, creativity, and trust in Allah. It's about recognizing that you can serve the world with your skills, that you can earn from your value, and that you don't need someone else to grant you permission to contribute. This realization is life-changing for someone who has spent years waiting for the right job to appear. The moment they understand that Allah can bless their effort outside the walls of employment is the moment they begin to take action. They start to see opportunities where before they only saw dead ends, and they begin to respect the small things: baking, tutoring, fixing, designing, writing, all of which can become sources of income with sincerity, effort, and barakah. The speaker also dismantles the shame that often surrounds small work. In many societies, people look down on those who earn through street vending, delivery services, manual labor, or home-based businesses. But Islam never attached honor to the job title. Honor in Islam is tied to intention, effort, and halal earning. The Prophet ﷺ said that the best food a man eats is from what his own hands have earned. That statement should destroy every ounce of arrogance that looks down on simple or low-income work. Because in the eyes of Allah, what matters is not the label, it's the purity of the income, the effort behind it, and the gratitude that follows. This part of the speech is a direct strike against the classism and pride that prevent many people from exploring alternative earning paths. The listener is reminded, if it's halal, if it's honest, if it feeds your family, then it is noble. There's also a major emotional benefit to internalizing this message. When you believe that jobs are not the only source of provision, you begin to relax. You stop feeling like time is running out. You stop measuring your worth by how long you've been unemployed. You begin to look inward instead of always looking outward. You ask yourself, what can I offer? What skill can I develop? What service can I provide? What knowledge can I share? And in that process, you begin to discover your own gifts. You learn to build something even if it's small. You taste ownership even if it's humble. And most importantly, you regain your sense of dignity. You're no longer begging for a position. You're building a solution. You're moving. You're growing. You're serving. That psychological shift alone is priceless. The speaker further explains that this change in mindset is not just about survival, it's about leadership. Communities rise when individuals become producers, not just consumers. When people stop waiting for the government or corporate sector to save them and instead begin creating value, offering services, solving problems, and helping others, that is when economies thrive. That is when dignity returns. That is when dependency fades. So this message is not just personal, it's collective. It's not just about your income, it's about your impact. If an entire generation is trained to only seek jobs, what happens when the jobs run out? But if a generation is trained to think creatively, take initiative, and trust in Allah's broader means of provision, they become unshakable. There's also a deeply spiritual undercurrent to this message. When a person limits their idea of provision to a paycheck, they are, perhaps unknowingly, limiting their belief in God's mercy. The Quran is filled with verses about how Allah provides in ways no one expects. Birds that leave their nests hungry return with full bellies. Seeds buried in the dirt produce entire trees. Rain falls on barren land and revives it. These are not just natural phenomena, they are reminders. Allah can provide through avenues we didn't consider. He can open doors we didn't know existed. But to witness that, we must expand our minds and free ourselves from the mental cage that says, I'll only be okay if I get a job. That's not yaqeen, that's fear. And fear is not a place to live from. One of the most beautiful elements of this teaching is that it puts control back into the hands of the believer, not in an arrogant way, but in a responsible way. You no longer have to sit helpless waiting for an interview call. You can start today with what you know, what you have, and who you are. You can sell a product, offer a service, teach a skill, build a platform, or even help someone else grow their idea. The ways are many. The barakah is in the sincerity. And as you begin to take those steps, you realize something profound. Your rizq was never lost. It was just waiting for you to walk toward it. Because rizq is not just about income, it's about discovery, it's about faith, it's about movement. And movement is what separates the hopeful from the hopeless. As the speech moves toward this conclusion, the listener is left with a clear choice: either continue clinging to the narrow belief that only jobs bring income, or step into a wider world where Allah's mercy flows through unexpected channels. The speaker doesn't promise quick success or instant wealth. What he promises is clarity, dignity, and the beginning of a new kind of journey, one where you don't wait to be chosen, one where you choose yourself, act with faith, and watch what Allah unfolds from there. Because the truth is, the greatest opportunities are not always posted online. They often begin in your home, your hands, your heart. And once you understand that jobs are not your only source of sustenance, you begin to live and work like someone who truly trusts in the sustainer. And from that moment on, the fear that used to hold you back disappears.